Hello and welcome. In this viewer edit, I'm gonna edit this beautiful picture from Marles. So first thing that I'm thinking of is definitely the crop. I'm not quite sure if the foreground element actually works all that well. Let me just at least try some other crops once. Panoramic crop right here, something like that. It's a little bit simpler, a little bit less distracting, and I actually think it works. Another crop that you could do as well would be just something like that, and a little bit more concentrated on the actual mountain, but I'm not quite sure. I don't really like this too much. Let's actually just start off with the original crop right here and go on with that and just start editing and maybe crop it later if I don't really like this original crop. So usually I like to bring up the shadows, but because I really don't think there's any interest in these trees, it really just disrupts the picture. So I think I'm just gonna leave that at 0, and I'm definitely gonna bring up the contrast to really give a little bit of punch out of these colors, especially in those beautiful tones on the mountain. Just something like that. And I see a lot of beautiful structure here in the clouds and in the sky, and I'm definitely gonna bring out these details even more by bringing down the highlights. Then whites, I'm also going to bring up the whites just a little bit to give a little bit more dynamic to the overall picture, of course. And in terms of blacks, obviously don't want to bring them up. That has kind of a similar effect as the shadows. But I also don't really want to bring them down, otherwise it's really a bit too much. So I'm just going to leave them at 0. I don't really think, I might actually just grab a graduated filter, drag it over the sky here, and don't really care if there's a little bit of the mountain selected, and just add a little bit of clarity here to bring out these structures in the clouds even more. And look at this beautiful detail. You don't want to, do it too much, otherwise it can look a little bit unnatural, but just pronouncing the structure right here I think works really well. And while I'm at it, I might just bring down the exposure slightly for the sky. So then let's go on with the rest of these basic adjustments. I think I'm gonna bring up the vibrance just a little bit to give this grass a bit more of a pop. And in terms of color temperature, now as you see, this is a relatively grainy picture because you shot this at 3200 ISO. But in terms of the actual color, I think I'm gonna make this definitely a bit warmer. It just is too cool for me. So let me bring that one up by just something like that. And yeah, I think that neutralizes and warms up the scene a little bit better before to after. And I think I'm pretty much done here with the basics adjustments, so let's go quickly down to the tonal curve and definitely bring some of that highlight slider up to give more interest, more dynamic in the sky, and play around with the rest of these sliders to, of course, just make the picture overall a little bit more interesting and a little bit more dynamic. This is of course just a viewer edit, so I'm not gonna, change around the hue sliders which have such a little impact, but I am going to go down here to the detail tool because there is so much noise. So I'm gonna have to raise the color noise reduction as well as the noise reduction by quite a bit here. So you see it takes away a lot of the detail, but unfortunately there's just so much noise that we pretty much had to do it. If you have a tripod, then I would definitely suggest you to increase the actual exposure time, the shutter speed, and bring down the ISO to a considerably lower amount so you get a lot less noise. But anyways, I think that looks already a little bit better, even though we lost quite a bit of detail. At least gets rid of some of the noise. Then maybe I'm actually gonna add some vignetting here. Yeah, that definitely works pretty well. And just make this something like that. And I think I'm pretty much done with the global adjustments. Of course, local adjustments are very important too. And I think that the foreground might be just a little bit too bright. So let me grab a graduated filter for pretty much the entire foreground and just go a lot into the minus exposure here. I really think that works well for the overall mood, because this is, probably shot at sunrise or sunset. So the overall scene in the foreground being a little bit darker, I think that works really well for the mood compared to before. And is there anything else I want to do? I think there are definitely in the previous graduated filter that I've added for the sky, by bringing up the clarity and bringing up the contrast, it really brings out the structure very nicely, but it also amplifies the color in the sky a little bit too much. So let me go into the saturation and just bring that down a little bit, and you see the difference. I think it works a lot better. So I'm definitely gonna add quite a bit of dodge and burning, no question. Before I add any dodge and burning though, let me go back to the cropping tool and just try this kind of panoramic crop once again. I mean, it doesn't look bad. It's very simplistic and very, fundamental in terms of composition. But at the end, since this is your picture and you've chosen the crop, and since I like both about equally well, I think I'm just gonna stick with your original crop here. So let's work with that. And actually, before I add any dodge and burning, I'm gonna add another graduated filter over the very bottom here and go even further down into the exposure. By the way, I really wonder where this mountain is. It looks absolutely beautiful, the whole nature and the whole landscape there. But as I said before, really just want to bring down the exposure down here to complexify the lighting even more. And here would be before any graduated filters, and here's after. And I think bringing down the exposure for the entire foreground as well as the very bottom of the picture right here really works well for the mood compared to the before. However, the foreground is a little bit too flat, so I'm gonna increase some exposure with the radial filter to add some additional interest. Just bring up the exposure and maybe even try to add a little bit of warmth just to warm up some of these light patches. And I think I'm gonna add a pretty big one here in the middle. And yeah, let's see. I think that works actually pretty well. Then let's right click duplicate and just add some more, a little bit smaller filters in some of these parts. Maybe actually get rid of this color, or at least lower that considerably. And just add some more light spots on some of these trees, just complexify the light as always. And of course want to make sure that you adjust every single filter, that it doesn't look too much on one place. And I'm just gonna add a few more over here, maybe even a few smaller ones on this field right here, and just add a little bit of exposure, right click duplicate of course, and maybe one more over there. Now in terms of negative exposure adjustments, I actually think I'm gonna try to add a pretty big one over this forest, over all of these trees pretty much, just to give a little bit more contrast between the foreground and the mountain. So it's almost like the layer in between, is a little bit more contrasty. I'm gonna show you how it looks in a second, of course, but first let me actually try to fit it and make sure that the exposure is all right. So here would be before that one negative exposure adjustment, and here is after. So you see it's a little bit less attention towards the actual trees, and that automatically means that there is more attention towards the actual mountain and the sky and the foreground. So I think that works pretty well, once again, before that one and after. And in terms of dodge and burning, because this is such an overcast picture, I don't really think I can go too crazy with it. So let's just say I'm done here before any dodge and burning, and here's after. Definitely looks a little bit more interesting and a little bit more complex. And I think to just finish the picture up, I'm gonna grab an adjustment brush here and just go a little bit into the negative exposure and add some vignetting here on the corners and maybe even on the bottom of this picture. And yeah, before the vignetting and after, just even a little bit more attention towards the center. So as a very last thing, I'm gonna grab the spot removal tool and just get rid of these little branches in the corner of the picture and hope that Lightroom does a good job. Yeah, that actually looks pretty good. So I think I'm done here with this picture. It's once again just one way of many different to edit this photo, especially in terms of the crop. I'm not quite sure which one I like better, whether it is this crop or the one you originally went for. Once Lightroom loads, of course. I think both work pretty well, and maybe it's even a little bit more interesting since there is an additional foreground element. But let's go here into the history and see the before, the unedited picture, and you see it's a lot flatter. It's definitely a very big difference compared to after. So yeah, I think overall this is a beautiful scenery and a really cool picture. Just if you would be able to have a tripod and shoot this at ISO 100, for example, I think you would get a lot more quality and a lot less noise. But anyways, thank you of course very much for submitting your picture, and thank you very much for watching this video. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already for more videos just like this one. I hope you have a great day, see you in the next episode, and of course, as always, take care.